Hey guys, we are back. Cocktails with Curt. The Brunch Edition, right?
The Brunch Edition.
Brunch Edition. We got mimosas. So I'm thinking this topic, we've been getting a lot of questions about, with everything that's going on in the world, and to anybody that's lost anybody to COVID-19 or knows anybody or lost your job, we are thinking about you.
Absolutely.
Because we've been in a situation where we know people that have had it, people you've worked with, our lender, people I went to high school with, so blessings to all of those. It's a really tough time out there. But one of the questions that we get asked all the time, especially during this time, is it a good time to buy? So how would you answer that?
Some guy actually asked me that the other day.
Oh, did he?
Yep.
In person or?
In person. Somebody that was out, we were getting something into the backyard, and he knows that he knows that, we have a real estate business, and he said, "Oh yeah, I heard the rates are down." And but I don't know because somebody said that it's going to be a recession and the rates are down. Is it a good time to buy?
Right.
And at first I didn't know how I wanted to answer the question
Because you didn't know his situation.
I didn't know his situation,
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that my answer and my response didn't come off as any form of like elitist or I was coming down or being condescending because I wasn't.
Yeah.
He might
You're
not
hearing
know.
all kinds of stuff
But the answer that I gave him, and I guess the answer I'll share with you that I gave him is that it's always a good time when you're prepared. So whether it's a recession, whether the rates are down, the rates are high, whatever the case is, if you're in the position financially where you have enough money in reserves or you have money for your down payment and you can keep up with whatever that monthly payment's gonna be, then yeah, it's the right time for you to buy a house. If you're somebody that you know that your job at this point might be hit or miss, it might not be the time for you to go jump out and take on that risk.
Right.
That's
a good point. Yeah.
If you're somebody that you're carrying a lot of debt right now, then yes, there is talk of a recession. I kind of think that we're in one now. It's just they're not saying it, but there is talk of this great recession and how the bubble's going to burst and all those things. And I think there's truth to that. So if there is, I feel like if you're a person carrying a lot of debt, this might not be the time for you to jump out and buy a house. You might want to focus on getting that debt down so that if there is a change in your employment situation or whatever, you're not overwhelmed by so much debt, and then even worse, taking on the new burden of having a hefty mortgage. So, I mean, the gist of it is I think that it really depends on where you are, how prepared you are, what's the risk of you buying a house now or waiting, that kind of thing. But just because the rates are down, they'll be down again. Yeah. So you can't base.
They'll be up and they're down. And I think the one thing is, and like I said, I've been in the real estate game for about 17 years. You're now when did you get 2004? So you're about 6 years in now. And you've seen it all too, right? And trust me, there's people in a recession that still buy houses. There's people that were in the depression age that still bought houses. We're in such a different economy, right? We have the sectors that are getting hit, right, are retail, restaurants, stuff like that. And my personal advice would be unless you are your job secure in those areas, then it's probably not the right time. But if you do, like Curt said, have a good paying job, you feel relatively secure. I mean, talk about your experience just like being in corporate America, because you have that too, about the 401k and just the way you save, like the advice you can give, because we're going through buying a home ourselves.
It's so funny, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Excuse me, champagne. It's funny you say that because was it maybe 10 years ago, this time 2009?
With the other crash happened?
With the other crash. Yep. So when that crash happened, I was living in New York at the time. Right. And I was working for a Fortune 50 consulting firm. Yep. And
it's about the time we met.
That was about the time we met, the time we met. That time. And so that threw me off actually.
You're like thinking about
I'm like,
time flies.
So at that time, the market had crashed. It was crashing. It was all around me, but I wasn't really paying much attention because I knew I still had my job, and I didn't even know what the red flags were to look for. Hindsight, I'm like, yeah, I should have seen those flags, but I didn't. So I was let go. And 10 years ago, or maybe it was more than 10 years, 2009, October 1st, 2009, I'll never forget it. That was my last, when I was actually let go. I was given my severance package, and at that time I was still like, oh, I've always just gotten out of a job and into another job, never, I just knew, I was confident, and that was not that time. That was when it was a recession.
Really hard to find.
It was really hard.
I think the difference between that one and this one, obviously this is a pandemic that affects the whole world, right? The global economy. I think with that, it really hit specifically the banks and the housing market.
And I was working, right. And
this isn't as specific.
And I guess what it makes me think about, though, is at that time, I was not prepared at all.
Yeah.
And, I had the savings, my savings was my next paycheck, basically. I mean, because I was laid off from work, so I was essentially burning through what little savings I had.
401k. And
my 401k, I was burning through that. I couldn't get a job fast enough, so I had burned through my severance, and then I was bleeding through my savings. So
if somebody asked you at that time, would it be a good time to buy? It was like, it's no.
It's a no.
For him. But there was people that kept their jobs, or executives or whatever,
right, and
they
now,
actually bought cheap.
They bought cheap, and now it made me think of, because while all this is going on with the pandemic, and it really is a tough time, we're now in a position where we're building our house
during the pandemic,
right. And knock on wood, not having any issues that should prohibit us from closing on.
So good, all that. We got jobs. That's the most important thing.
And I think the difference is, I think that at least for myself, and I guess you with me, so you must be prepared as well. But I'm much more prepared for a crisis, if you want to call it like this. Whereas in 2009, I was a lot younger. I thought that it's about living in the moment. It's about
living above your means.
Your means. And then once you lose all of that like that, and you realize how insignificant, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what car you drove or drive. It doesn't matter if you got the latest Fendi, Gucci, Abercrombie, Fitch, whatever. It really doesn't matter, because when that money stops coming in, those clothes they become old anyway. Yeah. It's kind of like...
We're learning that during this. How many times have we really... It's been sweatshirts and t-shirts.
Yeah, I mean, you see t-shirts. So I think that this time it's about buckling down.
This is the time. If this is like Curt said, if you're in this time like he was, what we're hoping to do is actually give this inspiration to you. And that, what was it, 2014, 5 years, it took about 5 years, right? 4 or 5 years later, a year before, we had to continue to work on our credit and all that, our savings. And the 4 or 5 year mark, we bought, we built this home. And now 6 years later, because again, those times were great, right? The last 6 years economically, if you hadn't taken this opportunity to save and to pay your bills on time and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of it's not really shame on you, but it's kind of like a learning experience.
It's but here's the reality. The reality of it is, some people will learn the lesson. Some people maybe this will be their first time going through a real financial crisis where they can't pay their mortgage, they can't pay their rent, or whatever. This might be the first time for some. And some will learn from that. Oh my God, I was not prepared. I will never be in that situation again if I can help it, because that's where I was.
Yeah.
And then there's some people that won't learn a damn thing.
Nope.
They will be
the ones that are hitting us up 6 months from now, as soon as they got a new job.
But
their credit, because they were struggling, their credit is affected. They have no savings. And what we're trying to say to you is, when Curt says, well, it depends on you, during the best times, during the okay times, during the worst of times, if you are prepared, you're ready to act. Nobody can control now, we control the narrative because we controlled our debt levels. We controlled our credit. We controlled our savings. And we wouldn't have started the process unless we had all these things lined up that we talk about.
And here's the mindset that some people have. So I'm not going to say any names, but I was talking to a friend, and she mentioned, some people got their stimulus check, the $1,200. Now we all know that $1,200 is, for most people, that's like groceries and maybe a utility bill for a family, right?
Think about it for
So that's $1,200, right? So that's a one-time payout.
That's not even including your rent.
Don't you know that? And I'm not trying to blow up a spot, but a friend of mine mentioned that with their stimulus check, they put that towards the down payment to go buy a truck. And then people wonder, like, they think it's just me, because it's like, wait a minute, you don't even have a job that's paying you like any type of, pension, retirement, 401k mat, and none of that. So a person like this desperately needed that $1,200 stimulus check and then some.
Yeah.
Right? This is a person that has 3 mouths to feed.
Wow.
Hers and her 2 kids.
Then they buy a truck too, which is
her and her 2 kids.
Crazy.
So to me,
that's not like that's again. It's about prioritizing.
Like how can
some of it just should be common sense, but
that's what irritates me because people make decisions like that, but then they'll come to us and say, "Yeah, I want to buy a house." How? How can you buy a house and you don't have a job?
Right.
Or how can you buy a house and you
haven't even come here yet in the relocation ones, which we posted about. But one thing also I want to point about when people say, is it the right time and all that kind of stuff, what I find for people is they're so fixated on the interest rate, which is obviously important.
That's important, absolutely.
But we were selling houses, guys, when people had a really good credit, interest rates were higher. People were happy when they got 4.75, 5 point something, whatever, because in their own situation, they had worked so hard to save and even get to a qualifying score that was fine for them. We've had people during this pandemic process where rates for a couple of days had dipped down to 3% or 2.99%. And all of a sudden people were like, oh, I don't know if I should lock at 3.5%.
And they walked away.
Which is the average right now when we're filming this. So the lesson is you really can't time it. It's really yes, the thing that you really should be concentrating on is your credit score and paying your bills on time to get the optimum best rate at that time. But you should not put off buying a house because the interest rate's 0.25 higher or 0.5 higher. Because if you were set up all across the board, you had your down payment, you had the right credit score, and you said, I'm going to hold off a year, look what a year can do, right? Did anybody see this coming?
A year.
There was people that were ready last year but wanted to hold off and said, I'll buy around April this time of year. What happened?
A lot can happen in a year.
Right.
A lot can happen in a year. We've seen that.
So our message is don't put off tomorrow what you can do today, but don't do today.
But don't rush in today if you need to wait until tomorrow.
Right.
Right.
If you need to wait till tomorrow,
there's nothing wrong with that. That's the thing. It's
but don't try to time it. Don't try to. This is what life has thrown our way, right? This is the biggest lesson is, prepare yourself everywhere. Health insurance, life insurance, housing, generational wealth, reserves, savings. And that's why we harp not just about getting you into the home, but being able to stay in it and maintain it. So any final thoughts on this one? Just about...
No, I just think it's something to think about. I think next time when you're asking yourself, should you buy a home now? I think, you can answer that question very easily. Do you have a stable job? Do you have income? Do you have money? Do you have money saved, money in reserves? Do you have money to close on a house? If you have those things, then the time for you to buy a home is now.
Right.
But if the answer is no to any of those things, or if the risk is too far great, then just wait.
And don't get discouraged. Yeah. Just do the steps that we always talk about, like Curt said. Continue to work on your credit, continue to build up your reserves. And if you are going through a job loss, he's an example, I'm an example.
For real.
Because we've both been laid off, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Yep. And we're happy to have you guys with us and keep the faith,
Well, he's okay.
I'm the cheesy one.
He really is on that one.
Could you please
cheers?
Give me the cheers. Why has he got to be so difficult? All right, guys. We'll talk to you soon.